Hi John, welcome to the Celebrating Small Steps in Achieve video series. Can you give me a little intro of yourself, please?
Yes, so my name's John Brindle. I'm an educational developer at the University of Liverpool. I work for the Centre for Innovation in Education there. Prior to that, I spent 10 years as a classroom teacher in sixth form colleges. And I also worked for a private company where I developed e-learning for a really big pharmacy company. I'm also doing a PhD in e-research and tell with the University of Lancaster, where I'm hoping to investigate equity issues within higher education and technology.
Thank you, John, for the intro about yourself and your interesting research. And I'm of the opinion that you like to amplify voices, right? So what can you tell me a bit about that?
I think it's really important to amplify voices within higher education, and actually in general. There's some really good examples of where highlighting voices can make massive changes. So there was a recent example, I think the BBC reported on it in Australia, where they've managed to really cut transmissions of HIV. And the way they did that was by getting everybody around the table and the groups of people who are impacted the most by the disease, and talked to them about what they needed and what they wanted. And they then enacted it. So I think highlighting voices is a small part of the picture of enacting really big change. I think it's highlighting voices and then taking action on those. I mean, for myself, I've experienced my own struggles in higher education. I had struggles in my undergraduate years, and the only reason that I got through was because I had a really good tutor who listened to me. And I think that's where that passion for listening to people's voices comes from, and enacting change on that. I fully acknowledge that I'm a white male, but I think it's about also using that position and that position of privilege and acknowledging that privilege and using it to really highlight the voices of those who are perhaps oppressed, to use the language of free air, or don't necessarily have the same levels of privilege that I've come to experience in my life. I mean, I will caveat with that, I've come from a very working class background. I've had to work very hard to get where I am, but nonetheless, I am still, by nature of my sex, my gender, and my skin color do tend to be better or be better received in certain situations. So it's really born out of that idea of critical pedagogy and critical digital pedagogies, where those voices can really help to enforce change. That's where I come from in that approach.
Thank you, John. And you've given this example of the success of the HIV cases in Australia, and how these have potentially changed a lot of lives, and will have impact not just now but also in the future, significantly decreasing the number of HIV cases. And what do you think when you think about critical pedagogy? What do you think of this sort of environment that we need in education? You've mentioned, yes, you privilege in the sense of color and being a male and things like this, but obviously you've also highlighted that you come from a background which was not that privileged academically. So what are your thoughts on what we can do in terms of creating that space and that environment to be able to have this sort of openness, like for example the one you gave in Australia?
I think a lot of it has to do with honesty. So you have to have an honest environment first. So people need to feel that they can be honest and feel safe to be honest about things as well. And I think that's where this kind of to kind of talk about safe spaces, and where the kind of concept of safe spaces is really important. And you know, safe spaces aren't just about having a space where you can say whatever you feel like, although that is part of it. I think creating an environment for open discussion is where things become a little bit tricky. You know, we have lecture theatres in universities, which are, you know, often tiered seating with people sat facing the front, so that they can, you know, consume and receive information, with the occasional bits of group work. But some of the work that I've seen, so some work in digital storytelling done by the Liverpool World Centre, where they sit people in a circle so that they feel comfortable and they can all see each other. And I think creating environments like that, where, you know, there is a trust, because I can see everybody within the room. You know, that there could be difficulties if somebody sat behind you, you know, and you know, you can't see them and they're talking, or they're, you know, whispering behind you, and you may feel less confident then to come forward. But actually sitting people in a circle where they can all see each other, and not feel threatened by people sitting behind them, but also having the tutor in that circle as well, or in that space where everybody is aware and able to see, it creates that more level footing really for talking. And I think creating that safe space where people can do that, where people can see each other, is quite important. I mean, there's other examples of safe spaces as well. It's not just classrooms where safe spaces are needed, where opinions can be heard, and thoughts. And also, it's not about necessarily contributing an opinion. You have to be able to feel safe to be quiet as well and not contribute. So it's a very difficult balancing act. Other safe spaces. So, for example, in Liverpool, there was a large increase a couple of years ago, a large increase in homophobic attacks in Liverpool. And the city, a lot of businesses in the city responded by declaring themselves a safe space for LGBTQ people. And that was amazing, because they basically said, you know, we're not standing for this. We are going to create a space where you can be your authentic self. And I think that's the key to a safe space. It's how do we, and I'm going to ask more questions than I answer really here. You know, one of the things that we need to be asking ourselves in higher education is, how can we create a space where a student, or any student, can feel like that they can be their authentic self and actually contribute in a way that is reflective of them and their beliefs and their position, their social standing, any of those elements, and not feel threatened or judged in that. And I think there's a lot of work to do, you know, particularly in the way that we construct physical spaces, but also digital spaces as well. We need to think about how we set up our questions and responses in digital spaces. Could we build in elements of anonymity, you know, to allow people to, you know, say what they really think without fear of going back? Obviously that creates its own problems with bullying and things like that. So I think it's this balancing act, really. Safe spaces, you have to find a very nice balance, and that's both the exciting thing about safe spaces, but also the most difficult thing about safe spaces, I think.
Thank you, John. You've actually highlighted something very important around something as simple as seat positioning, which, especially when we handle difficult situations, you know, which might bring back trauma, including, I will include there, or even workplace bullying, victimization, things like racism, oppression, and everything. And you've also said something, you're probably going to ask more questions, but I think this is an important part of reflection, isn't it? And to improve our practice, because obviously we will not get it right, but I think questioning it and questioning the status quo is very important. You mentioned something around digital spaces. What are your thoughts around, maybe even just one or two thoughts around what we could do now, because right now, like, we almost kind of seeing the pandemic kind of subsiding a bit, and a lot of universities are going, even though they're, you know, including FE, they're going for hybrid and blended learning. What do you think we could use at this moment when we're planning this vision for how we do that post-pandemic? Do you have any idea to share?
That's a really good question. I really like that question, but it's going to take me a second to think about an answer, because it's a quite complicated one, really. I I think it's about the way that you set the tone for behavior within those spaces more than anything. It's very easy, you know, we see it on social media, and sometimes it does creep its way into the classroom as well. You know, people feel less accountable online, and they feel like they can get away with, you know, incidents of racism, homophobia. We see it, you know, with football all the time. You know, if a black footballer misses a goal or something like that, then they get a torrent of abuse in the online world. And I think looking at digital spaces and looking at hybrid and online spaces, it's about the way that you phrase and approach those things. It's difficult. There may be students within your classroom and your digital classroom or your hybrid classroom who have genuine reasons why they can't come on campus. They may be related to poverty. They may be related to disability. They may be related to, you know, transgender identities, or not feeling comfortable traveling from one place to another. Mental health issues. You know, there's a slew of issues that could cause, you know, a hybrid environment to be needed. I think we focus too heavily on the pandemic as being one of those reasons, but actually, the more you reflect and the more questions you ask about it, the more that you realize that there are more areas where hybrid learning could actually benefit people. And I think the way you set the environment, it's setting up an environment where you can be inclusive of those people. So we've tried some things with high flex learning, you know, where you've got a mixture of online and on-campus students all working together. And that requires significant infrastructure to be able to make that work. We've experimented ourselves with that, and it's very difficult to really, you know, include everybody in those environments. But I think it's mixing, you know, allowing for some synchronous activity and allowing for some asynchronous activity. So the asynchronous activity can catch those people who may not necessarily be able to attend the synchronous activity. And we need to make those things quite simple and quite straightforward for people to be able to access and use. There's research been done recently by the government into inclusion in higher education and disability particularly, and we still see that disabled students are, you know, getting worse outcomes from higher education than able students. And I think having a decent, well-designed hybrid pedagogy of some sort will help to alleviate some of that. But you have to really think about it, and I think it comes from the module design stage or even the program design stage sometimes, where you have to really think about, well, how are we going to deliver this in a way that is accessible and inclusive for all? And actually, as a point of change within our university, we have a curriculum framework, and now at the heart of our curriculum framework, we've added inclusion to the very middle of the framework. So we have to consider all the elements of our framework through the lens of inclusion to be able to make sure that the modules appeal to and can be accessed by all.
Thank you, John. You've actually hit on the nail there. The need of hybrid is, as you said, we've accentuated on the fact that there was a pandemic, and that's why we are kind of going on that. But then we've always had students and staff who've had learning disabilities, who are introverts, who have mobility issues, which legally even we were not even fulfilling their basic needs to participate inclusively in their day-to-day learning and teaching activities. And thank you. I think you were kind of reading my mind when I just came up with this question. Is there anything you're celebrating at the moment? Anything that you have been working for some time that you kind of are at the bit of the tunnel, I would say, light, and you know, around discrimination, around the topic, something that you feel, yes, it has made a difference? Me and
a team of people within our team at the University of Liverpool, so Kerry Colby and Kate Evans and Becky Atkinson and myself formed a committee to put the Liverpool Learning Summit on, and we based it on EDI. So we invited internal, external speakers for a week, focused on EDI issues, and it was brilliant. We ranged from a dyslexic academic who presented on her experiences and what she had to go through to to get where she is now, through to an inclusive gymnastics club who break down barriers by using sports therapy with young people to be able to help them to achieve what they want to achieve, which was fascinating. I think they called the Active Therapy Foundation, and they were amazing. And so what we're seeing now, though, is we're seeing those seeds that were planted and some of the feedback from our attendees, and we're trying to enact that now. So we're creating new guidance around running conferences and how to make them accessible and things like that. We will highlight it. We held our hands up. We made a small mistake when it came to visually impaired people, in that slides would not be described to people. So ensuring that our presenters could make sure they read out any slides that they put on was actually something that we didn't really think about necessarily, but came up as natural part of the course of the conference. So we've learned from that. And my colleague David Watson and I think I can't remember the name of the other colleague who's doing it now. I feel really bad, but they are putting together some guidance now to help and support. It's Joanna Cheetham are putting together some guidance to support and help when we do other conferences that may be virtual, but also that can help students when they're presenting and help staff when they're presenting as well in an online environment. So it's those little changes that are coming through that I think are really important, because a lot of little changes make for big change within an organization such as a university, I think.
Well, thank you so much, John, for participating on the Celebrating Small Steps in EDI video series.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you inviting me and the work that you're doing on this. Yeah.
Until next time, it's been Teeroumanee Nadan with Celebrating Small Steps in EDI.